It's not possible to say what will happen for sure. Now, I've been acting as though I knew exactly what's going to happen in terms of the unholy trinity, but I don't. I could be wrong in these very strong trends that I described. And so one of the things that I do when I talk to groups is to describe 4 major alternative futures that Hawaii could have. And I've discovered over the many years that I have used variations of these 4 alternative futures, that there's one future that almost everyone says they like. Different groups will express it in different ways, but some people imagine a time, let's say in the 1950s, when life was sort of easy, when you didn't have to lock your door, when everyone knew everybody else, when you had time to go fishing and spend time with the family, and things were great, and they sort of liked that future, and they imagined it happened. I leave it up to you. I don't know whether it happened or not, but it's something that people feel that way about. And when given a chance, I find most people here in Hawaii, even those that are most intent on destroying that way of life by continued economic growth, get sort of nostalgic and wistful, yeah, that'd be awful nice if we could like that. Well, we're going to have a chance. We have a real opportunity to do that. Bud Smizer, the editor of the Honolulu Star Bulletin, when he retired from that and went to work at, well, he took a sabbatical, I guess, at the East-West Center, he wrote a pamphlet, a small monograph, on alternative futures of Hawaii. And one of them was basically the future that I just described, the laid-back future. But he didn't like it. So he titled it Hawaii as a Backwater. As a backwater. Well, I've taken that and turned it around and say Hawaii as the best little backwater on the planet. That we will have an opportunity to be self-sufficient. So I'm going to lay out 5 brief statements about Hawaii, not internally, but in relationship to the rest of the world. That's the thing I would like to have some thoughts and discussion on. How should Hawaii be in relationship to the rest of the world? The first one, the one that I just mentioned, Hawaii is the best little backwater on the planet, assumes, and I think this is extremely realistic in terms of our being required to be this way, Hawaii is almost entirely self-sufficient for food and all material goods. Everything we eat, almost everything we eat, everything we consume in terms of clothing and housing and everything else will be produced here in Hawaii. Trade and communication, it will largely be within and among the Hawaiian Islands, with only slight reference to the rest of the world, and there will be no significant military presence in Hawaii. So that's one alternative future, and I think that is very possible, possibly an real alternative. A second assumes also that Hawaii must be much more self-sufficient than it is now, but assumes that we are not the only island and not the only island culturally related in the Pacific, and so Hawaii will become part of some sort of pan-Pacific trading community, cultural community, of at least Polynesian and perhaps Polynesian and Micronesian as well. And so that the focus of life will be on activities in the Pacific Islands. Here also, there will probably not be much of an American presence, certainly not much of an American military presence. Now the third that I want you to consider is Hawaii is under the protection of China. It seems to me that if I were to look around and say who's likely to be the ruler of the Pacific community, the Pacific Basin over the next 50, 100 years, it would not be the United States. It might very well be China. And in fact, my group of futurists at the University of Hawaii, when they prepared a series of futures for Chinatown recently, had as one of the futures that China would join hands, and we created, I'm sorry I didn't bring it, we have a nice picture of what we call the Statue of Harmony, which has Sun Yat-sen and Liliuokalani holding hands above each other in the Statue of Harmony that Beijing bestows upon us and puts in Honolulu Harbor. So that's really a possibility, and to the extent there is tourism, it's tourism from China mainly. There obviously is no American military presence, but there may not be much of a Chinese military presence as well, but there might be some. The fourth possibility is Hawaii is in free association with the United States. That the model, even after independence, is somewhat like the model with the Micronesian islands, in which they are said to be politically independent but are under the protection of the U.S. military. I think, first of all, I've got a lot of problems with that, but let me just say that if that arrangement would be chosen, my assumption is that there will not be much economic aid from the United States, though there might still be some. So the relationship, you can get some analogies from the situation of free association. And then the fifth example, I'm a futurist, and I'm sorry that I have to talk like a futurist at this point, because one of the elements of a futurist is that I see technological change as a major source of social change. And if somehow, well, I used to be a technological optimist. I used to assume that we would be able to solve all of our problems through technology, that in 2008 we would be not using a drop of oil, everything would be local renewable energy and all the rest. Because, hey, didn't we tell everybody about this 40 years ago? Yeah. Weren't we going to take this seriously and make changes? Absolutely, I was convinced. I told Jan Newhouse and I fought about this all the time. Nah, Jan, you're wrong. Don't be such a doomsayer. It's going to be all right. Ira Roeder, I'm sure you all know Ira. He and I were on the same stage arguing opposite ends for many years. About 3 or 4 years ago, I had a symposium in the Department of Political Science, and Lynette was there, in which I said, Ira, I was wrong. You're right. We did not take advantage of the past 30 or 40 years to make these technological changes. But somehow, let's imagine, because that to me is the future I prefer, that we will have artificial intelligence and genetically engineered beings and robots and all these high-tech things that, hey, every time I go to Korea, woo, that's what